So I know everyone out there is going to see Wonder Woman this weekend, and everyone loves it, including myself. I can't wait to see it again. But let's move into something completely different. Let's give some love and respect to something from my childhood. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is based off the book series of the same name and stars Kevin Hart, Ed Helms, Thomas Middleditch, Nick Kroll. The movie follows two boys, George Beard and Harold Hutchkins. George is the kid on the right with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the left with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. But anyway, these two spend their days at school pulling pranks, making their other classmates laugh, and making comic books based off their favorite creation, Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, they have to deal with their asshole of a principal, Mr. Krupp, who wants to ensure that their friendship is destroyed permanently. So the two of them decide they've had enough. They hypnotize him with this magic 3D hypno ring, and sooner or later they hypnotize Krupp into thinking that he is their superhero creation, Captain Underpants. And when that happens, things get a little out of hand. George and Harold have to keep Mr. Krupp / Captain Underpants under control, and at the same time, a couple of villains pop in to try to make things more complicated. Now, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were two book series that pretty much dominated my childhood, and that was the Harry Potter series and the Captain Underpants series. I actually am a big fan of these books, or at least back then when I was a kid. And I actually found out that I still have a couple of copies of the original books that I got. I did used to own the second, third, and fifth book, but I can't remember what happened to them. I remember the second book being worn out and some pages were tearing off. Can't remember what happened to the third and fifth. But anyway, I was a big fan of these books. They were lighthearted, they had a lot of toilet humor, they were often immature, but they were very entertaining, mainly in their illustrations. And it just demonstrated like the perfect life for a kid growing up, especially a fourth grader, where there are no bullies, you make everyone around you laugh, you're popular. It was pretty much depicting my dream scenario as a kid, right down to all the cool superhero saving the world bits. So I kind of stopped reading the books once I got into my teenage years. The last one I ever read was Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy, Part 2, The Revenge of the Ridiculous Robo-Boogers. You gotta love these titles. But anyway, I just kind of grew up and moved on to other things. So when I heard that this movie was coming out, I was curious because this was a big part of my childhood. The trailers looked really terrible and didn't make me laugh at all. I didn't like the fact that Kevin Hart was voicing George because his voice seemed out of place. But I wanted to give it a chance because this was a big part of my childhood growing up. I wanted this movie to succeed. And let's just say that this weekend is the weekend of the surprise, with both this movie and Wonder Woman. Both of these movies I wanted to be good, but didn't really feel like they were going to be good. Wonder Woman had really good trailers, whereas Captain Underpants did not. But lo and behold, Wonder Woman ended up being a great movie that the more I think about, the more I love. And Captain Underpants ended up being a really good, faithful adaptation of something from my childhood. When you look at this movie at first glance, you can tell that they are respectful to the source material in terms of the animation and the art style. The art style perfectly captures the look of those books, and the animation is very fast-paced, quick, and energetic, just like the tone in the books, with its really goofy, fast-paced, and over-the-top nature. The first half of the movie is sort of a modification of the first book, and then the second half pulls in elements from the second and fourth books, mainly Professor Poopy Pants, voiced by Nick Kroll, and the Turbo Toilet 2000. Which is actually something I didn't mind too much, because the books were really short. You could breeze through them in like 30 minutes maybe. And this is just like the same scenario with comic book adaptations. Like the movie Civil War is not a direct adaptation of the original book. So you know changes are going to have to be made. They're going to have to pull a lot of other elements, and in this movie it worked. But it still manages to be incredibly faithful to the books, because George and Harold are just as they're written in the books. Mr. Crump is just as cranky as he is in the books, and Captain Underpants is as lovable, heroic, and stupid as he is in the book. It also has a lot of fourth wall elements, and it even has the iconic Flip-O-Rama scene, when basically there's an action scene in the book, and the pages instruct you to just flip it back and forth so you can see the animation back and forth. It's fun. I'm glad that they incorporated that bit into this movie. As for the voice work, I mentioned that I wasn't a fan of Kevin Hart being George in this movie because Kevin Hart always has the potential to be funny, and his stand-up's really great, but his movies are not so much. And the last time he voiced an animated character was in The Secret Life of Pets, which I found his voice to be unbelievably annoying. Like, I hated that character so much. But as George Beard, they actually pulled him back. He sounds a little more reserved in this movie, and it made me laugh. Ed Helms does a really good job as Mr. Krupp, aka Captain Underpants. He manages to be a total dickhead and asshole as Mr. Krupp, and then manages to go seamlessly into the lighthearted, lovable, yet stupid nature of Captain Underpants. Even though I do have to admit Captain Underpants is a little dumber in this movie than he is in the books. Like, almost to the point of he's mentally challenged. That wasn't something I was too fond of. But all the scenes where he's dumber than usual are shown in the trailers. Everything else is perfectly fine. The other voice actors are really good, even though I do have to admit the voices are very different from what I imagined when I read the book. But that's not a fair criticism because it's one of those, this is what I imagined in the book and this is what happened in the movie, because the movie should stand on its own. And the voices, while not what I imagined, are still really good. I also found this movie incredibly consistent with being chuckle-worthy, which, if there was any negative, it's that there was nothing about this movie that made me laugh out loud. Which I have to admit, even when I loved these books as a kid, they were never laugh out loud for me. Each book had a consistently silly tone throughout, and never got boring, but there was never any moment in each book that I could recall where I laughed out loud. And it's not really a bad thing that these books never really made me laugh out loud. Same applies for the movie. It did make me chuckle throughout with its silliness and over-the-top nature, but it never made me laugh out loud, like, say, Shrek 2, which I think is DreamWorks' funniest movie to date. But anyway, I feel like this is a movie made for that 10-year-old crowd, or somebody who's really into the books as a kid and grew up with them, because when I saw this movie, there were a gang of kids there laughing their asses off, which normally in those scenarios would irritate me, but then again, this movie is kind of geared towards that audience. That's the audience that the books are geared towards. And I know I would have loved this movie even more as a kid. But as it stands right now, with the perspective of a 26-year-old, I do like it. It's a faithful adaptation from something that I remember as a kid. So my advice is, if you're a kid under 10, more specifically a boy, and you can ask your parents to take you to see this movie, or if you're somebody who grew up with the books as a kid, like me, then it's definitely worth seeing in your lifetime. It's very faithful to the books, makes changes when necessary just to fulfill an hour-and-a-half long movie, and again, it's consistently chuckle-worthy throughout. However, I will say, if you're older and never grew up with the books as a kid, then watch at your own risk. You will appreciate the art style because it does have a very unique look to it, but the humor might not be appealing to you, and it is made more towards fans and a younger audience. And that's my review for Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, which I kind of wish they didn't have that subtitle in there. Just Captain Underpants will do well. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.